everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Foraging Your Lawn. Julia Lee is here, and she's going to be talking about beginning foraging. Just so you're aware, Julia can't see the comments, but I'll be able to see them. So if you have questions as she's talking about dandelions or something else, please feel free to ask, and we can address those within the presentation. Thank you, Julia.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. I'm so excited to be here today. Welcome, everybody. I love talking about plants. So when Meredith and I were talking about doing this presentation, I was very enthusiastic. And I love having a discussion with people because that's really how you learn. So please, yeah, feel free to shoot me some questions. We're going to talk about beginner foraging today. So if you're curious about it and you've never foraged before, or you've maybe heard like, yeah, I think you can eat dandelions. My grandma maybe made a recipe with dandelions or dandelion wine. This is the perfect program for you. It's going to be a very gentle introduction to foraging. You don't have to be an expert. I always say I'm an enthusiast. I'm no expert. I'm constantly learning. And this is really meant to be the beginning of your foraging journey. I'm glad that you're here. You're curious to learn about your local habitat and you're ready to dig in to some serious local food. So again, if you have questions, feel free to ask during the presentation. And I do want to note that this is one of a two-part series. So tonight we will have our very beginning foraging program. And then our next session, Meredith, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's April 1st at 6:30. So this session will be the very basics, and we'll start with 3 really easy to identify plants, which don't have any like poisonous lookalikes. They're very safe and probably in your backyard. And then our next session will dive into even more foraging basics that could be in your backyard. And of course, we'll be sharing recipes. So it should be a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us. And let's get started with what could be more fun than a disclaimer. Oh my gosh, let's check that out. Meredith is my lovely slideshow operator, so thank you, Meredith. Woohoo, a disclaimer. Let's start off with a legal disclaimer. So again, before we start, very important, never eat any wild plant unless you are 100% sure that you have identified an edible species. This is really important, especially new foragers are really enthusiastic, want to get out there, and sometimes are not as careful with identifying because you want it to be something so badly that you think it is or you misidentify. A good story I tell is I brought my husband Shane along with me to go foraging for the first time last year, and he was really convinced that he found some high bush cranberries in the woods, and I went over and looked at them. They were definitely nightshade berries. So he did what he was supposed to do. He brought somebody with him that he knew could identify the plants, but sometimes we just get really excited, right? So again, be 100% sure that you have identified an edible species, cross-reference with an expert, somebody you know who forages, a foraging group, or several reference books, which I will be providing at the end of the session, some of my favorite resources. So have fun, but be responsible. And bottom line, identification is entirely your responsibility. You're going to put it in your body, on your body. Make sure you identify and you're responsible for making sure it's safe. Okay, that's our legal disclaimer. Let's get into the good stuff. So I just want to go over the basics of what we're going to be talking about today. And the first one is going to be like, why forage? You know, we have Costco's and everything. We have supermarkets. Why would we go about foraging in the first place? We're going to go over kind of what happened to our foraging knowledge. If these plants are so great, why have we forgotten about them? We'll get into some foraging basics, some safety tips and tricks, some pro tips. We'll get into some common wild edibles that I guarantee you, at least one of them, you're going to find in your lawn this spring. And then, of course, the best part, the recipes. I'm sharing some of my favorite recipes. And again, this is just a jumping off point. If you look online, you will find tons of dandelion recipes, especially tons of foraging recipes out there. So I'm going to give you some of my favorites, and I'm sure you'll find many more delicious ones. So let's start off with the question of like, why forage food at all? In modern times, when everything's at our fingertips, why bother going out and trying to find these wild edibles and identifying them? So you want me to eat that? You want me to eat a dandelion? That's something that I hear a lot when I talk to people about what I'm making them, whether it's some wildflower cookies or sauteed dandelion greens. Why the heck would you eat that? there's a couple really positive things besides just the great food that go along with foraging. So one of the first ones is you get to connect with nature. If you're foraging for plants, you're looking at the habitat in a much closer way than we normally would. So you get to know the ecology, you get to know the plants around you, and you get to encourage biodiversity, which is super important. If you're just having a lawn, that's one monoculture, that's one plant. But with more biodiversity, it's better for the environment, it's better for the pollinators, and it's better for you. So you get to eat those plants. You get to eat with the seasons. Foraging is the ultimate local food. It's in your backyard. It's growing wild. You can harvest it with the seasons, and you really get to look forward to eating different things during different times of year. For example, with dandelions, you're going to want to eat the leaves in the spring. We'll get into that in more in just a little bit. But the leaves in the spring are super tender and delicious, whereas you're going to want to harvest the roots in the fall after they've had a chance to mature. So you get to look forward to different foods during different parts of the year. And these plants are often super rich in vitamins and nutrients. I'm going to go through the health benefits of some of my favorite plants. Dandelions, like I always say, if I ever get a tattoo, I'm going to get a tattoo of dandelions. That's how much I love them. That's how great these little plants are. So they are usually packed in vitamins and nutrients, and foraging gives you some exercise because you're walking around, you're looking for these plants, and being in nature. Studies have shown if you go out into the woods, you go out in your backyard, you're surrounded by nature, it actually can help reduce stress. There's so many benefits to foraging beyond just you get to have some free food. Thanks, Meredith. So next we're going to talk about, so if these plants are so great, if foraging is so good for you, then how have we forgotten about this? What happened? Because I know I have had relatives of mine say, hey, you know what? Your grandpa or your grandma used to forage. We used to make dandelion wine. We used to make poultices. And it seems like we lost a lot of that cultural knowledge. So being the librarian I am, I did a little bit of research. And from what I could trace, it seems like the cultural knowledge started to get lost in the 1950s when lawns became a status symbol in post-war America. So it became one of those symbols of the American dream. You know, you wanted your house, your car, your 2.5 kids, and you wanted a perfect lawn. It also was a time when pills started popping up, and you wanted your nutrients in the form of all of these pills you could take and vitamins. So it became really kind of posh to take these pills instead of using maybe a more natural source. And so someone who had weeds in their yard who was using these local plants was kind of seen as like a country bumpkin, someone who wasn't keeping up with the Joneses, and they were not seen as not having as high of a status as someone with that perfectly manicured lawn. Lawns today are still quite an obsession with Americans. I did a little bit of really interesting research. Lawns are the single most irrigated crop in the country. And remember, we can't eat this crop. This is not something that's feeding people. And we are spending more money and more water on a crop that can't feed us than any other crop, covering 3 times the acreage of corn in the country. A third of all the water used in American homes, over 7 billion gallons, goes to watering a plant that, again, doesn't feed us or give us much of a benefit besides it prevents erosion. And each year, American homeowners use over 70 million pounds of pesticides to maintain their lawns. And of course, the more research that's coming out is saying these pesticides have really negative side effects, not only for the environment, but for the human beings as well. So the lawns obsession starting in the 1950s has had a really detrimental effect on the biodiversity of our habitats and for our health. So another reason to forage, it'll save you money. You'll spend less time watering your lawn. These plants that are considered weeds are pretty hardy and need a lot less watering. And it'll be good for the biodiversity and the animals that rely on these plants, these flowers. They'll be really good for them. So that's kind of the history of how we lost this information. But the good news is it's coming back. And today we'll give you a little bit of an intro on the basics of foraging. Perfect timing, Meredith. Thank you. So some foraging basics. Now that you know, hey, some of the benefits, how do we go about starting to forage? Well, again, the very first biggest tip, if I could shout anything out in big bold letters, is to make sure it's 100% the plant that you want it to be, that you think it is. So make sure that you have positively identified this plant. Some things that are recommended: to find a mentor. After I got the article published and was on Coolest Coast talking about foraging, several people in Manitowoc reached out to me. They're like, "Oh, you forage too? That's so great. Oh my gosh, I didn't know another person foraged." So there are foragers out there. And if you can find a mentor, that's one of the best ways to start. Go forage with someone and have them forage alongside of you to help you identify those plants. Another thing you can do, how I started off, is to get a good book. And I think I know a place where you can get some good books. The public library. That's where I found my foraging print resources. I think I've checked out almost every single foraging guide that the library has, and I have some great recommendations at the end of the presentation. But the library can be a really great resource to find some foraging books. Again, learn the habitat. What plants are native to your area, what kind of edible plants, and also learn the plants you should avoid. So that will really help. Just knowing what's local to your area and what you might find when you walk out in your backyard. Again, follow the seasons. There are some plants that should be eaten in the spring, and some plants you can't eat in the fall for whatever reason. Or once it gets hot, you shouldn't eat this plant because certain compounds exist that are rendered inedible. None of the plants that we're going to talk about today have those factors to consider. But again, if this is your jumpstart to your foraging journey, you're going to want to learn what plants to pick when. And keeping a foraging journal is really handy, especially when you find a good patch of something and you want to go back to it. I know people who morel hunt keep those morel locations super secret. So if you keep a foraging journal about, hey, I found this on March 31st and it was a great crop, and you keep a diary of what you found and what you've done with it, it can really help increase your knowledge. And if when we're talking about foraging and we want to talk about like the biodiversity and health of the ecosystems, I really want to talk about sustainability, because if we're going to go out into nature, that's awesome, but we want to be respectful of nature. Remember, there are animals and plants that rely on, or animals and insects that rely on these plants a lot more than you do. So I go to the 10% rule. For most plants, there are going to be some exceptions, especially if it's like an invasive plant. But my rule is no more than 10%. So don't over harvest. Remember, other animals and insects are relying on these plants way more than you are. So please be respectful. I know you'll get excited and you want to harvest a lot, but it's not just you're affecting. So be respectful. The 10% rule is a good one to go by. And fortunately, if you're harvesting dandelions, you're probably going to have a lot of dandelions to pick from. That's usually not an issue. So the plants that I've included today are generally ones that are going to be found in abundance. So 10% is going to be, you're still going to get a really good crop. Avoid foraging rare plants. Again, those plants we're talking about today are not going to be an issue. But if you know that a plant is rare or endangered, or you only see like one or two of it in an area, avoid harvesting. That plant existing in that habitat and providing biodiversity is going to do so much better for the environment than that one meal that you get out of it. Again, only collect the parts of the plant that you use. Some plants you can dig it out like the dandelion and use all the plants. But if I'm not going to roast the roots for tea, I'm just going to and I just need the leaves. I just pick the leaves off and let the dandelion grow. Remember, the more I let it grow, the more food it's going to produce. So if you only need one part of the plant, leave the rest of it in the ground and let it continue to grow. It's more sustainable, which means you'll get more food, and the animals and insects in that habitat will get more food as well. Another way to get yourself some more wild edibles is to cultivate them in your garden and your lawn. If you don't spray pesticides on your lawn, I bet you're going to get some dandelions growing, some wild plantain, and some violets. So the best way to cultivate them is to provide that space. Another example of this is I have not had luck finding stinging nettle around Manitowoc. If anyone knows where stinging nettle is, let me know. So I actually bought the seeds for stinging nettle. It's a great plant, a wonderful herb to use. So I'm actually going to be planting some stinging nettle, which some people consider a weed, but it's a highly medicinal plant. So I went and I bought the seeds, and I'm planting some stinging nettle. Haven't found it around here, so I can actually cultivate it in my own lawn. So again, just touching on the sustainability, that's something you really want to keep in mind as a forager. And safety. Safety is a big one. So when we're choosing a place to forage, safety, not only when we're talking about what plants to forage, but where. So you're going to want to avoid, of course, toxic areas. What I mean by that are roadways. So you might see a bunch of plants and ditches along the roads, but you do not want to eat those plants. They're constantly exposed to pollutants, and that will go into your body. So even though you might find some really good dandelions on the side right near the road, you do not want to eat those. Railroads is another place where plants can pick up a lot of pollutants. You do not want to eat any plants that are directly near a railroad. Also, you just probably don't want to be too close to a railroad. I mean, that's a good safety tip for everybody. And you also want to make sure that the area you are foraging in has not been sprayed with pesticides. So if you have sprayed your lawn with pesticides in the past and you're looking to forage, what I would recommend is contact the company you have employed before, ask them what chemicals they used and how long it takes to break those compounds down to safely eat those plants. That company should be able to provide you that information. But if you don't know if an area has been sprayed with poison, ask. Or just if you don't know, the best course of action is not to forage there. So make sure that the food that you are eating is safe to eat. Another big one, of course, get permission to forage. You don't want to just wander into your neighbor's yard or somebody's yard and not have permission to forage. Know the water source if you're going to be foraging for plants that are located near a stream or a river. Make sure that water source isn't polluted and make sure that it is in good condition before you forage those plants, again, because they can soak up those pollutants. Know what parts of the wild plants are edible and when to harvest. Again, the plants that we're dealing with today, you can eat all the parts of them, and it doesn't matter for safety reasons when you eat different parts of the plants. They're totally safe. But there are some plants, again, that only certain parts are edible, and they're only edible in certain parts of the year. So you're going to want to just make sure that you double down on your research. And again, my last tip is do your research. So today should be a springboard for you. You're starting your journey. I'm so excited you're here with me, but it's not the end of your journey. So after today, I highly recommend check some books out. Get a foraging guide, get several foraging guides, talk to some of your friends, maybe family members, some elders who have foraged in the past who can help you identify plants, and just make sure you research after today, and you can 100% identify all the plants that you are eating. And those tips will keep you nice and safe when you are foraging. I'm going to take a sip. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post them. Otherwise, we will go into some common wild edibles. We're going to cover 3 today in our initial foraging program. We're going to talk about dandelions, wild plantain, and violets. Again, these plants, when we talk about them, when you see pictures, I guarantee you're going to have at least one of these in your yard because they are so plentiful and they have a lot of great hidden benefits. So let's find out about some of my favorite plants. My first one, my love dandelions. I think I love dandelions so much because they are so plentiful. I am one of those people, I have very tolerant neighbors, by the way. I'm one of those people who, when I see the dandelions go to seed, I blow the seeds all around. I want them in my yard. I get really excited when I see dandelions in my yard because I know that means food. So dandelions are wonderful for a variety of reasons. And again, they're great for pollinators as well. So how do you identify a dandelion? You're going to look for those hairless, sawtooth leaves growing in a rosette pattern. That means they're kind of growing like a rose from the center. It's a terrible rose, but you kind of get the idea. They're growing out from the center in a rosette pattern, and they're above a central taproot. And you can kind of see in that picture with the colander is actually my dandelion root harvest from last year, you can see that tap root can be really long. And when I see a really long tap root, I get really excited because that means I'm going to have a lot of dandelion tea. And they have, of course, the distinctive yellow flowers that we all know and love. Dandelions, super safe to eat. You can eat every part of the plant, and it is amazingly good for you. Check out those benefits. It is high in vitamins and minerals, including potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, vitamins A, B, and C. Oh my gosh, and dandelion root contains inulin. And I looked this up. It can, when used in conjunction with your doctor, so make sure you talk to your doctor about this, it can be used to help manage diabetes successfully in patients. So again, always talk to your doctor if you're on medication or anything before starting something like this, but it has been proven in the past to help people with diabetes manage the insulin levels. Dandelion root tea is used as a digestive aid and is supposed to help with headaches. So you can actually go to a health food store and buy dandelion root tea. And it's not cheap. It sells for a pretty penny. I drink dandelion root tea all the time, and I can tell you it does have some really great digestive benefits. It can reduce bloating. So if you're feeling a little bloated after a meal, if something didn't sit with you right, you drink a cup of dandelion tea and you feel much better. It has, I believe, per ounce more potassium than a banana and more iron per ounce than beef. It is chock full of nutrients, and it's right in your own backyard. So how the heck do you harvest this thing? So the good news is, again, every part of the dandelion is edible. You want to harvest the leaves in the spring. And why I say that, you can eat them in the summer, and I do, but they get bitter once it gets hot. So I was going to say now, but it's covered in snow. So in a few weeks, when the dandelions start popping out of the ground, that's when those young, tender leaves are going to be nice and sweet. You can have them in salads. You can saute them, but they're going to be really, really nice and good. I'd say the prime time would probably be in Manitowoc, probably mid-June, because it doesn't really get all that hot before mid-June. So when the weather's cooler than 80 degrees, that's when these dandelions are going to be, those leaves are going to be tasty, just raw. You're going to want to harvest the buds as well. You can eat them fresh in the spring before the flowers open, or you can pickle them, which is kind of fun. I haven't tried pickling dandelion buds, but I might try that this year. It just sounds delightful. You can harvest the flowers at any time. Fun fact. The flowers only open on sunny days. So if it's a cloudy, rainy day, they close up and you can't harvest them. So find a nice sunny day and you can harvest those flowers at any time. And then the roots are best harvested in the fall, simply because they have the most nutrients. Now, the picture in my little colander, I actually harvested those in the spring. I'll harvest them whenever, but in the fall, that's when you're going to get the most nutrient bang for your buck. You're going to want a long trowel for those bad boys. Because like I said, the taproots can go super long, and I want to get all of the root that I can get. So you're going to want to use a long trowel for that. Any garden trowel will do, but you're going to want to get pretty deep in there to grab those. Again, you can eat the leaves at any time of the year. I just recommend after mid-June, you're going to want to probably saute them to take some of that bitterness out. But dandelions, super amazing. I see a question actually from Jennifer. What do dandelion leaves taste like? That's a great question. It depends on the time of year that you pick them, Jennifer. To me, the dandelion leaves in early spring kind of taste like spinach. They definitely have that like leafy green taste to them. It's stronger than a lettuce, but it's pretty mild in the spring. If you eat them after it gets hot, it's a bitter green taste. So it's more like a kale. But then if you saute them, a lot of the bitterness goes out of it. So when they're at their peak in the spring and before it gets hot, they can taste sweet like spinach, which is really nice. And then after they get hot, they get that bitter quality to them that you can cook out. So that's a good question. Woohoo! All right, I think we can move on to my next favorite plant. But Jennifer, to really find out what they taste like, I encourage you to pick them this spring. Find out for yourself, of course. All right, wild plantain. Oh, this is another one of my favorite plants. It's a crazy medicinal plant and another one that you end up paying big bucks for in the store. And it grows in your backyard. I'm almost positive a lot of people are going, oh my gosh, I have that in my backyard. You can use that. You sure can. So how do you identify it? It's going to be green, oval leaves, and they're very distinctive. The ribs I don't know if you can tell in these pictures, but you can tell it has those veiny ribs in the leaves. That's very distinctive. 5 to 7 rib leaves. Again, that grows kind of, you can see the rosette pattern coming from the center. The leaves have thick stems, stringy stems. Like if you pull the leaf off, you're going to see those stems coming off, or those strings. And when the stems or leaves are broken, like I said, they reveal those string-like veins, kind of like celery. And then they have long, skinny, pointed flowers that grow from the base. And these also contain a small pod containing dark seeds, which are also edible. So every part of this plant is edible. It is one powerfully medicinal plant. The seed husks are actually sold, if you guys have heard of psyllium husks, they are sold at natural stores as a dietary fiber substitute. That's what these things are. So anytime you see psyllium seeds or psyllium seed husks, it's this plant that's growing in your backyard, and they are expensive, and you can get all the benefits of psyllium husks from this plant in your backyard. It's amazing. So you can, bruised or crushed leaves can be used to treat snake bites, insect bites, cuts, and rashes. That's because there's an enzyme in these leaves that's astringent and actually helps pull out that venom from, and the yuck is what I call it, the yuck from all of your wounds. So it is really fabulous to put on any sort of, like I said, insect bite. I'll get into my story of hornet stings, and it does have anti-inflammatory properties, which is wonderful. The tea you can use with either fresh leaves or dry leaves, and it's supposed to be good for your lungs. So if you have a cold, I have a flu fighting tea recipe toward the end of this presentation that you can use. Is supposed to be a mild expectorant, and it'll help if you're feeling kind of congested. It's like I said, antibacterial and anti-inflammatory, and it makes really good poultices and salves. So this is just a crazy powerful plant. Now, some people eat the leaves. I haven't. I don't think they they taste very good because you have to remove the veins. I'm lazy. I like my free food to be easy. So I have never eaten the leaves. If you eat the leaves, let me know what you think of them. I drink them in the tea, but again, if you want to eat them, you'll have to sit there and remove the stringy veins. So it's too much work for me, but I have heard you can eat them. Catherine asked, oh, hi, Catherine. Catherine asked, will we be able to rewatch or view these slides later? Yes, you will. We will have this available posted on our Facebook page and YouTube. So if you missed any of it, you will be able to watch later. No problem. And how to harvest. Every part of this plant is edible again. So eaten fresh, you can steam and saute them. Again, I've never tried it, but it is definitely a thing people do. I'm just lazy and I'm not going to rip the strings out. So you totally can. But I mainly use the leaves and seeds for poultices and for teas, and it makes a very lovely tea. So that is how I generally use the plant. Again, if people are a little more exciting than I am, you can try eating leaves fresh and see how it goes. All right, wild plantain, love it. Gets a bad rap for just being a weed in your lawn. Super medicinal plant. And let's find out about violets. I mean, who doesn't love violets? And now you can learn how to eat them, which is also wonderful. Oh, look at how pretty they are. They are a native wildflower, which is wonderful. It tends to favor woods and thickets and stream banks. I do have lots of wood violets out in my backyard. I'm very lucky. It features those heart-shaped leaves, which you can see, and large blue, violet, or sometimes white. I also get yellow or white flowers, depending on what strain you have, and each flower appears on its own leafless stalk. It has high levels of vitamin C and vitamin A, and they make delicious salads. First of all, it really looks pretty in a salad. It adds that pop of color, but they, again, kind of taste like spinach, is what I would relate the violet greens to. You can eat them fresh, you can saute them, but I generally eat the leaves fresh because they do have a very pleasantly mild flavor to them. They're not bitter at all. The flowers you can use to make tea. You can make simple syrups. I've made violet simple syrup before. You can look online. There's tons of recipes for like cocktails, or if you like to add it to your coffee, you can make a little syrup out of it, or you can add that to baked goods. You can make violet jelly. There's lots of recipes for that online, or you can incorporate them into baked goods, which I will be sharing a recipe on my wildflower cookies. So violets have a really pleasant, subtly sweet flavor. It's not going to like punch you in the face with flavor. Violets are kind of like, they're very nice. Like they're very pleasant, very soothing, very unassuming, very mild tasting plants. Ooh, I saw Sarah made a violet flower white balsamic vinegar. That sounds super tasty. I'm going to be trying that this year. Thanks for the pro tip, Sarah. That sounds yummy. All right, speaking of yummy, let's take a look at some of our recipes. I'm going to take a little sip of water. Eat your lawn, or as I say, don't spray your lawn, saute it. All right, so one of my very favorite recipes, and yes, you'll be able to check out this presentation later, so you don't have to scribble and write this all down right now. I also include the links of where I found some of my recipes at the end. So very simple recipe. Again, I like simple. The most difficult part of this recipe is actually getting the dandelion petals, and this is kind of a great job if you have small children. They can help you gather the dandelions and then get the petals out. So you are not going to want any part of the green around the petal or around the flower for this recipe, because that'll add a little bit of bitterness. So what I usually do is I pop the flower heads off of the plant, and then I'll take a kitchen shears and cut the bottom part off, and then take out the yellow flowers from, or the yellow petals from the flower. But you're not going to want any of the green stuff around the flower. It's not going to hurt you or anything. It's just going to make it taste a little bit bitter. Dandelion petals have a kind of a honey sort of taste to them. It's mildly sweet and it's wonderful in these cookies. This was what changed my husband's mind from thinking I was just a weirdo eating weeds from the yard to, oh my gosh, this is good. There's dandelions in here. So this also I've used violets in as well. So if I'm making wildflower cookies, I will use a half cup of dandelion petals, and then I will use violets as well to put a little kind of a pop of color in there. So it's a really simple shortbread recipe that's pretty forgiving. And the biggest part is you're going to want to just make sure you don't get any of that green in there. So it's a great job for little kids to help out in the kitchen. Like, oh, make sure you pick out all the green parts. Kids really like helping with that. But super simple. Doesn't take very long. And I gave these as gifts for Mother's Day last year to my sisters and my mom. I couldn't see them, so I shipped them some wildflower cookies. Fun story. If you didn't hear it on my interview in Coolest Coast, if you missed that, I sent my sister some wildflower cookies, and her daughter was 9, and my niece, and asked like what they were. So my sister said, oh, they've got dandelions in them. And so my 9-year-old niece was telling her friends that her aunt made them weed cookies. And I was like, no. Please, let's call them wildflower cookies. We do not want to think your aunt is giving you that kind of baked goods. So wildflower cookies is what I like to call my cookies. It's the preferred name. Very easy to make, super simple recipe, delicious. Makes a really nice presentation, especially if you're giving them as gifts and you have those violets in them. All right. Oh, another great way to make dandelions is sauteing them. And this is super easy as well. Oh, we lost it. We went back to cookies. There we go. Thanks, Meredith. So this is super easy. Again, I really like easy. If you're vegetarian, leave the bacon out. You can put in tofu for sure. I'm a big fan of tofu. So that whatever protein you add, it just kind of makes it more of a meal. You can also add beans, like go nuts. I like to add a little bit of sugar because, again, especially if I'm sauteing, especially making this like midsummer, that little bit of sugar is going to take that bitterness away from the dandelion leaves. I like to add a little bit of onion, a little bit of apple cider vinegar, and some garlic. And you basically cook the bacon, you add the onion and garlic, cook it up, and then you add the vinegar, sugar, and the dandelion greens, cover and cook until they're wilted, and then you eat it. It's delicious. I really recommend, if you're gonna go foraging this summer and you try one recipe, try this recipe. It's just absolutely amazing. All right, let's go on to what's next. Oh, the violet lemonade.
Julia, we have a question.
Oh, yes.
What's the best way to clean all the different greens?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, that's a really good question. I know some people clean them with vinegar, and some people buy like vegetable and fruit sprays. I know my lawn has not been sprayed with anything. I do totally organic, so I have just cleaned them thoroughly with water, and I'm kind of good with that. So whatever your comfort level is, I just make sure, like I said, I wash them in cold water, and that's all I do. If I'm doing the dandelion roots, I really make sure that they're kind of scrubbed clean. But if you're just using greens again, and you know it hasn't been sprayed with anything and it's super safe to eat, I rinse them with cold water. But I know there's different like vegetable washes out there and fruit washes. I don't think that would hurt anything, but that's a really good question. I just use water. All right, let's go on to something tasty. So if you're making those cookies, if you're making those sauteed greens, you're going to want maybe something to drink with that. So violet lemonade is thebomb.com. It's also purple, which is really fun. Now, fun fact, lemon juice actually changes the color of violet tea. So if you just make the tea, it looks blue. But then you add the lemon juice and it turns vibrantly purple. So it's super cool to do as kind of a STEM activity with your kids and talk about like, oh, why do you think the color changes? And kids watching the color change, and if they get to add the lemon juice, oh, it's mind-boggling. They love that. I do that with my nieces all the time. So it's really super simple. You're going to want to make the violet tea. The hardest part for this is, of course, getting the 2 cups of violets, or getting the violets that you need, because it's going to be quite a bit of violets. So you're going to be picking for a little bit. Again, make sure you're picking sustainably. I've got a really large violet patch in my yard, so I know I'm going to make sure I collect a responsible amount of violets. I put them in the jar, and then you pour the boiling water. And once it's cooled, you're going to strain out those lovely flowers. And then you're going to add the lemon juice and the sweetener. It couldn't be easier than that. Sweeten to taste, add some ice cubes to it. You've got a refreshing, delicious lemonade that you can eat with your sauteed dandelion green dinner. You can also make this with dandelion flowers. I've made dandelion flower lemonade, and it adds that sweetness to the lemonade. That's really lovely. So, but I love that pop of color that the violet lemonade makes. It's pretty special, and kids just absolutely adore it. All right, and I think I've got one more recipe. That is my cold and flu fighting tea. This one is pretty simple as well. We're gonna, before the winter sets in, so late summer is when I usually harvest, I'm gonna get those plantain leaves and seeds. I have blackberries in my yard, and blackberries are actually good. Like, blackberry leaves are good for your throat if you have a sore throat. So I throw these in here. If you don't have blackberry leaves, don't worry about it. And you're gonna add ground ivy leaves. If you're thinking, what's ground ivy? You'll find out in my next session. It's also really good for flu fighting and cold fighting. So all you're gonna do is harvest these leaves, make sure they're clean. I don't have a dehydrator, so I just leave them out to dry. And it's turned out lovely for me. So you leave it out to dry until it's dry and crumbly, and then you store it in an airtight container. You can also enjoy plantain tea fresh. You just tear up the leaves, and then you pour boiling water over them. And then I like to add honey. So it's super easy, but it is full of good nutrients and vitamins that'll help you when you're under the weather a bit. So those are my recipes to share. I do want to touch quickly. I know I'm over on time, but I want to touch quickly on some of the resources that I had. I told you, Meredith, I could talk about plants forever, just forever. Other planting uses. I forgot about this. My hornet story. So long story short, I stepped on a hornet's nest over summer, some ground hornets, nasty buggers. I got 4 stings on my right leg, and nothing was helping. Like they said, put baking soda on it, put milk on it. Nothing was taking the pain away, and my leg was super swollen. I did take Benadryl, but it just really made me sleepy. So I've heard about plantain. I heard if you tear it up, put it on stuff, it'll help with stings. I tore the leaves up, and I mixed a little coconut oil on there, and then I stuck them on my stings, and it helped almost instantly with the pain. I was shocked. And I put 2 rounds of poultices on there, and the swelling went down within a matter of an hour, and it was incredible. So that's another use for plantain. You can just tear it up. If you get stung outside, take a leaf, tear it up, put it right on your sting, and it'll help. It's really pretty fantastic. I'm glad you learned some new things. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for joining. Okay, so my recommended reading. My very favorite book is Midwest Foraging Guide. I use this constantly. I think I'm just going to have to break down and buy the book for myself. I'm a librarian, so I just check books out, but I use this so much. I am definitely going to have to buy a copy for myself. It is very comprehensive. It's local to the Midwest, and it's my go-to guide when I am out foraging. Backyard foraging is also a really great resource. 65 familiar plants you didn't know you could eat. A lot of them it has what we talked about today and more. So that's another really great one. And Sam Thayer has a lot of really great Wisconsin-based foraging guides out there. So I highly recommend these resources, and they're available at your local public library. So you can check those out and start learning today. I also have some online resources that I use because when I'm foraging, especially if I'm foraging something I'm not quite familiar with as dandelions, I like to check multiple sources. So I use my guidebook, and I also have a couple online resources. EdibleWildFood.com. Really good comprehensive information. They have detailed photos, which is really helpful, and they have an advanced search that's really fantastic. So I highly recommend EdibleWildFood.com. There's another wildedible.com. They have the ultimate guide to wild food, which includes tips, suggested reading, references, and identifications. That's another really great resource. I also recommend going onto the DNR's website, because they have some foraging rules for state parks and public lands that you should just be aware of. You can forage on most state parks and public lands, and they'll just give you some more comprehensive information about that. And then WPR actually has had so Wisconsin Public Radio has had some great foraging articles that I've used as resources before. So definitely recommend those resources. And I think that might be it. I think it's just my more excited because I'm a good librarian. So I included my research. I included some of the sites that I got some recipes from. And I just hope you guys had fun today, learned some things about plants. Thank you so much for being here. And again, if you have more questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I just appreciate you spending some time learning about some local plants. Oh, I think you're the bee's knees, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. And just remember, this was a 2-part program, so tune in on April 1st at 6:30 for the second part of this program.
And hopefully by then, the snow will be melted. And maybe we'll be seeing some plants pop up, but you guys will be prepared when it does. So thank you so much. We'll see you April 1st at 6:30.